Have you ever wondered, why do people only show up when you start pulling away? Why do they love you when you're easy to love, but disappear when you're not? That's not love. That's consumption. You see, most of us grow up believing that being available emotionally, mentally, physically is the highest form of love. But Carl Jung would disagree. He believed most of what we call love is actually a survival mechanism. It's the persona, the mask we wear to be accepted, applauded, and adored. From childhood, we learn crying too much, you're too much. Having needs, you're needy. Wanting space, you're cold. So what do? We shrink, we serve, we smile, we become emotionally available, not because we're overflowing with love, but because we're terrified of being unloved. We think, if I keep giving, they won't leave. But what we're really doing is abandoning ourselves, hoping someone else won't abandon us. This isn't kindness, it's self-erasure. Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But how can you become anything real if your identity is built on convenience for others? Let's be honest. How many times have you picked up the call when you didn't have the energy? Listened to someone's problems while ignoring your own pain? Said yes when your entire soul screamed no? You didn't do it out of love. You did it because you feared the consequences of not being available. The world rewards the emotionally available, but it respects those who have boundaries. So here's the brutal truth. People don't love you. They love what you do for them. And as long as you keep playing the role of the emotionally available caretaker, you'll never know who actually sees you. The raw, complicated, mysterious you. You've been conditioned to think love is sacrifice. But if that sacrifice always costs you, then maybe you're not in a relationship. You're in a transaction. And the moment you stop being available, that transaction ends. But don't fear that, because when the fake ones fade, you finally create space for what is real. This is the beginning of self-reclamation. This is where the illusion starts to die and the real you begins to live. You think you're being kind, you think you're being strong, always there, always listening, always giving. But what if I told you, this isn't strength, it's a trap woven by your shadow, the unconscious part of your psyche that you deny, repress, and run from. Carl Jung believed that the shadow contains everything we've rejected in ourselves, our anger, our selfishness, our need to say no. And when we deny these parts, we don't become better people. We become performers. We perform empathy, we perform care, we perform love. But deep down, a quiet resentment starts to grow. Why does no one check in on me? Why do I feel invisible? When I give so much, why does it hurt to be the strong one? Because you've been taught that being emotionally available means being endlessly open. But constant openness isn't love. It's leakage. It's your life force draining out of you to nourish people who never asked about your thirst. This is the shadow trap. You're not being noble, you're being afraid. Afraid that if you set boundaries, you'll be abandoned. Afraid that if you express your own pain, you'll be judged. Afraid that if you stop saving others, you'll have to face your own brokenness. So you keep serving. Not from abundance, but from fear. Not out of connection, but out of compulsion. And the people around you, they get addicted to this version of you. They don't see your shadow. They see a light that never flickers, a river that never dries. And the moment you pull back, they call you cold. They say you've changed. They disappear. Good, let them. Because every time someone leaves because you refuse to betray yourself, you've dodged a relationship built on codependency, not consciousness. Jung taught that real individuation, real growth, begins when we integrate the shadow. When we learn to say, yes, I am kind, but I am also fierce, I am giving, but I am also allowed to keep, I am available, but only when it doesn't cost me my soul. You weren't put on this earth to be a bottomless well of comfort. You're not a therapist, you're not a savior. You are a human with wounds and rage and silence and storms. And those who can't hold space for that version of you are not your people. The real ones don't fear your darkness. They welcome it because they've faced their own. You've been present for everyone. You've picked up every call, replied to every message, showed up even when it broke you, but no one tells you that there is power, sacred power, in your absence. Let that sink in. We live in a culture obsessed with being available, online, on call, on point at all times, but constant presence breeds invisibility. When you're always there, people stop seeing you. When you're always listening, people stop asking how you feel. When you're always ready to help, people assume you need nothing, and so begins the slow erasure of your soul. Not by force, but by habit. But here's the secret Jung whispers from the depths. The self is not found in the noise, it is revealed in the withdrawal. When you disappear intentionally, you don't fade. You condense, you become heavier, more mysterious, more potent. You step into what the mystics call the sacred no, the refusal that creates space, the silence that demands respect, the absence that makes them question what they lost. This isn't manipulation, it's alchemy. Every time you say, "I will not be available today," you are saying, "I am not yours to consume." And in that moment, you move from being a resource to being a force. Think about nature. The sun disappears for half the day. The moon hides for weeks. Even the tides retreat. But do they lose value? No. They gain it. They become cyclical, rhythmic, sacred. Your absence isn't a void. It's a mirror that reflects back to others what they've been taking for granted. It forces them to ask, "What did I expect from you? Why
did I believe you owed me? What happened if you never returned? You in things, you begin to yourself, you rest, you rebuild, you remember that your worth isn't measured by how many lean on you."
Deeply you stand in your truth, even if no one is watching, because that's what true power looks like. Not presence that pleases, but presence that chooses. Most people think boundaries are about keeping people out, but that's not entirely true. Boundaries are about keeping yourself sacred. They're not walls of ego, they're fences of self-respect. They're not about control, they're about clarity. Carl Jung understood this better than most. He once wrote that the greatest danger to the soul isn't the devil outside, but the unconscious agreement to abandon yourself for the comfort of others. Read that again. How many times have you said yes when everything inside you screamed no? How often did you tolerate what broke you just to be nice, just to avoid conflict, just to keep the peace? But here's the hard truth. Every time you break your own boundary, you teach others to do the same. And over time, you become a diluted version of yourself, palatable, predictable, easily consumed. But your soul, it was never meant to be soft and shapeless. It was meant to be fierce, defined, unapologetically sovereign. You see, boundaries are a language, and when you speak them clearly, the right people will understand, the wrong people will leave, and both outcomes are acts of grace. A boundary says, "This is where I end and you begin. This is what I value, and I protect it. This is who I am, and I will not betray that for belonging." Without boundaries, you become a mirror reflecting everyone else's needs, but never your own face. And the longer you do this, the more invisible you become to yourself. But when you reclaim your boundaries, you reclaim your identity. You become rooted, grounded, immovable. You stop explaining yourself. You stop defending your no. You stop negotiating your worth, because your boundary is not up for debate. It is a love letter to your soul. And the people who truly see you, they will honor it. Not just because they respect you, but because they are doing the same for themselves. Boundaries are not barriers, they are bridges. Bridges that allow connection without collapse. So if you've been wondering whether your boundaries are too harsh, ask yourself this instead. Am I betraying myself to protect their comfort? Because your soul is not here to be walked on, it's here to be walked with by those who see your worth. Let's be real. Most of us were trained, not taught, but trained to be pleasers. We were rewarded for being quiet, for not causing trouble, for putting others first, for being easy to love. But there's a dangerous cost to this conditioning. You become a version of yourself that only exists to manage other people's emotions. You shapeshift, you over-explain, you say yes out of guilt. You apologize for simply existing with needs, and slowly, piece by piece, you disappear from your own life. Carl Jung would call this a fragmentation of the self, a person so afraid of rejection. They build their entire personality around being accepted, but acceptance bought through self-abandonment is not love. It's a performance. And here's the terrifying truth. You can be liked by everyone and still feel utterly alone because they don't love you. They love the mask you wear. But what happens when you stop performing? When you stop molding yourself to be digestible? When you stop saying yes just to avoid being disliked? Something incredible happens. You begin to exist in your raw, undiluted presence. Not everyone will like it. Some will leave. Some will call you difficult. Some will say you've changed. Let them. Your job is not to be agreeable. It's to be authentic. Because when you shift from pleasing to presence, you stop chasing validation and start radiating self-worth. You no longer walk into a room wondering, will they like me? Instead, you ask, does this feel aligned with who I am? That question changes everything. Your relationships deepen because now they're real. Your energy rises because you're no longer draining it to impress. Your confidence builds because it's no longer tied to applause. Presence doesn't beg. It doesn't explain. It doesn't chase. Presence is. And when you live in presence, you attract those who resonate with your truth, not your performance. You start living, not surviving. Speaking, not censoring. Loving, not performing. And that's where your power lives. So if you're tired of being everything for everyone, maybe it's time to be everything to yourself. Let's be blunt. Emotional availability isn't always a virtue. Sometimes it's a trap. We live in a culture where being always there is romanticized, always reachable, always listening, always offering space, time, love, care. But here's the cost no one talks about. When you're always emotionally available, you become emotionally invisible. People stop noticing your presence because it's a given. They stop appreciating your effort because it's constant. They stop asking how you feel because they're used to you holding space for them. You're no longer seen as a person with needs. You're seen as a container, a listener, a support system, a tool. Carl Jung believed that every light casts a shadow, and the light of availability, the desire to be present, loving, giving, casts the shadow of being used, drained, and eventually ignored. If you never say no, people stop believing you can. If you never disappear, people stop thinking you might. And when that happens, your value drops to zero. Not because you're worthless, but because your constant presence removes the contrast that gives it meaning. Scarcity creates value, not manipulation, mystery, not games, boundaries. Imagine this, you give and give. You're always there when they need to vent. You pick up every call, reply to every message, support every breakdown. But the moment you need support, silence. Or worse, discomfort. Why? Because people got used to the idea that you don't need anything. You've trained them to believe it. This isn't just sad, it's dangerous. You become a ghost in your own life, a highly functioning, emotionally aware ghost, seen by everyone but deeply alone. So what's the answer? Strategic unavailability, not To punish, not to manipulate, but to protect your soul. Disappear when you're drained. Say no when it's too much. Let people miss you. Let people feel your absence. Why? Because absence sharpens appreciation. Mystery magnifies presence. And your energy is not infinite. It must be guarded, not just given. You are not a vending machine for emotional support. You are not a therapist in a friend's body. You are not a character in someone else's healing journey. You're a soul, a human, and you deserve reciprocity. So from this moment forward, you don't owe anyone your availability. Let them earn it. Let them rise to meet you. And most importantly, let your energy rest in silence. Because sometimes silence says everything. Imagine standing still, completely calm, not chasing, not pleasing, not performing, just being. That moment where you stop over-explaining, stop trying to fix, stop seeking validation, is the moment you turn into a mirror. And let me tell you, people can't handle their own reflection. When you stop being available for dysfunction, you expose the dysfunction. When you stop overextending to be liked, you reveal who was only there for convenience. When you stop emotionally babysitting others, you show them what emotional immaturity really looks like. You didn't change. You just stopped buffering their reality. And that shift? It terrifies people, because now they can't hide behind your compassion. They can't blame you for their chaos. They can't rely on you to soften the consequences of their actions. They're left with themselves. And often, they don't. Like what they see. Carl Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But most people, they don't want that understanding. They'd rather blame the mirror than face the reflection. So what do? They'll call you cold. They'll say you've changed. They'll try to provoke you, to make you react again, to make you play the old role. Because if you don't react, they're stuck with the truth. And the truth is, you were never the problem. You were the one holding it all together, quietly, silently, sacrificing your peace for theirs. Now as a mirror, you reflect truth, not to hurt, not to shame, but to clarify. And clarity is power. You're no longer emotionally tangled in their drama. You're no longer addicted to fixing people who don't want to be healed. You're no longer negotiating with your worth. You're still compassionate, but from a distance. You're still kind, but with boundaries. You still care, but not at the cost of your sanity. And here's the wild part. When you become this mirror, you attract higher-level connections. People who see your stillness not as rejection, but as invitation. To meet you where you are. To match your peace. To bring their own mirror. Clean, honest, whole. That's when real connection begins. Not through trauma bonding. Not through emotional codependency. But through mutual awareness. So, from this point, on Be the Mirror, let silence speak, let your calm confront chaos, let your distance reveal depth, because when you stop absorbing people's projections, they're forced to see themselves, and that's where true growth begins. For them, or for you to walk away. There comes a point where your presence is no longer healing, it's enabling, no longer supportive, it's being used, no longer kind, it's being drained. So you do the unthinkable. You withdraw, not with anger, not with revenge, not to make a statement, but because something inside you whispers, this is no longer love, this is self-destruction dressed as loyalty. And in that moment, you begin the most radical alchemy of all. You stop giving your emotional energy to people who don't know what to do with it. See, when you're always available, always understanding, always checking in, you become predictable, even invisible. They start expecting your compassion, your forgiveness, your softness, like it's owed to them. But the second you pull it back, the silence becomes louder than any argument, because now they feel the void you used to fill, not out of malice, not to hurt them, but because you're finally choosing you. And that shift, it's pure alchemy. Carl Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming your true self, requires pulling away from what keeps you unconscious. That means distancing yourself not just from toxic people, but from your own addiction to being needed. Because let's be real, sometimes it's not about saving others, it's about avoiding the emptiness inside you. But when you sit in that emptiness, really sit in it, you realize it's not a void, it's a clearing, a space where your true self begins to emerge. Withdrawal in this way is not retreat. It's refinement. You're not running away. You're recentering. You're not abandoning anyone. You're finally coming home to yourself. And yes, it's lonely. It's silent. It's terrifying. But it's also powerful, freeing, transformative, because in that space, you no longer need to be liked to feel worthy. You no longer chase closure. You create it. You no longer fear losing people. You fear losing yourself. Your emotional withdrawal becomes a signal to the universe, to your inner child, to your future self. It says, I'm done betraying myself to keep people comfortable. That's not cold. That's sacred, because every time you choose yourself, you heal a version of you that once thought they had to be everything for everyone. So now you don't react. You don't explain. You don't chase. You just disappear. And in that disappearance, you don't lose power. You reclaim it. There's a moment in everyone's life when they look in the mirror and don't recognize who they've become. Not because they've changed, but because for years, they were never themselves to begin with. What we call personality is often just a mask, a strategy, a survival mechanism stitched together by childhood wounds and societal expectations. Be nice, be agreeable, don't make others uncomfortable. Make yourself small so others can feel big. And so the true self gets buried under performance, politeness, and pain. But when you withdraw, when you stop being emotionally available to everyone but yourself, something terrifying happens. Your old self starts to die. It's not dramatic. It's not loud. It's quiet, like a funeral with no guests. You begin to feel empty, confused. Lost. Why? Because for the first time, there's no one to mirror you back to yourself. No validation, no approval, no external applause. Just you, raw, unfiltered, naked, and what you find isn't always pretty. You discover your fears, your rage, your guilt, your shame, all the emotions you kept at bay by playing the role everyone expected from you. But Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This is the dark night of the soul, the psychological crucifixion, the ego death, and it hurts, because the self you thought was you, the pleaser, the performer, the peacekeeper, starts to dissolve. It feels like you're breaking down, but in reality, you're breaking open. This is where transformation begins, not in affirmations or positivity, but in the sacred grief of who you used to be. You mourn the self who tolerated abuse, who settled for breadcrumbs, who begged to be seen. You mourn the self who needed permission to exist. And in that mourning, something stirs. You realize you don't want your old life back. You don't want the same friends, the same conversations, the same shallow distractions, because they were built for a version of you that no longer exists. You start craving depth, authenticity, truth, even if it's ugly. You'd rather be alone in truth than surrounded in illusion. This is the rebirth Jung hinted at. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But rebirth only happens after death, so don't fear the emptiness, don't escape the silence, don't numb the pain. Sit with it, because it's not the end. It's the beginning. You're not breaking down, you're shedding skin, you're not going crazy, you're waking up. The old self had to die, so the real you could finally breathe. Once you've buried the old self, the mask, the appeaser, the walking apology, you don't just walk away clean. You bleed first, because being reborn isn't peaceful, it's violent. a spiritual surgery without anesthesia. But then something clicks. You look around and realize you don't want to go back to the old life. You can't go back. The people who once praised your softness now accuse you of being cold. The ones who relied on your emotional labor now say you've changed. They're right, you have, because once you've reclaimed your sovereignty, you start building something most people are terrified of: boundaries, not walls of bitterness, but gates of self-respect, not fences of fear, but borders of clarity. You learn to say, no, I don't owe you my energy. No, I'm not here to fix you. No, your emergency is not my responsibility. And that no is sacred. It's not rejection, it's resurrection. Every time you say no to someone who drains you, you say yes to the part of you that was ignored for years. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He believed the path to individuation, the process of becoming whole, required us to withdraw from the collective. Not out of hatred, but out of necessity. Because when you're constantly available to others, you become a mirror for their wounds, not a vessel for your own soul. So you begin to cut ties, not out of malice, but out of alignment. You stop explaining yourself, stop defending your solitude, stop justifying your distance. Why? Because peace doesn't beg to be understood. Here's the harsh truth. Not everyone will survive your transformation. Some relationships will rot. Some connections will dissolve. Some people will demonize your growth because they benefited from your absence of boundaries. But that's not your burden to carry. You weren't born to be everyone's emotional crutch. You weren't put here to be consumed. You're not a therapist in disguise. You're not a punching bag wrapped in empathy. You're a soul in evolution, and boundaries aren't barriers to love. They are the very foundation of real love. You start attracting different energy, people who respect your time, people who value your silence, people who don't need you to shrink so they can shine. Your relationships shift from transactional to transformational because the resurrected self doesn't chase, it radiates. So here's the final truth. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your healing. You don't need to make your boundaries palatable. You don't need to return to the fire just to prove you can survive the burn. You are no longer available for the things that broke you. And that is your freedom. You disappeared, not because you were weak, but because you were being forged in silence, in isolation, in that brutal furnace of introspection. You faced the truth most people run from, your own shadow, the hunger, the rage, the deep-seated resentment you never spoke about. You stopped pretending to be the nice guy. You stopped dimming your fire for comfort. You stopped making yourself small for others to feel big. And now you return, not as a servant, not as a savior, but as a sovereign. The king archetype isn't about control. It's not about dominance. It's not about applause. It's about alignment. It's about standing so fully in your truth that even when you say nothing, the room feels you. You no longer chase validation because you've validated yourself. You no longer seek love from the broken because you've learned to hold your own heart. You no longer fear solitude because you've made peace with your own mind. And that peace, that inner stillness, that's your new kingdom. People notice. They may not understand it, but they feel it. You've become untouchable, not because you're distant, but because you're centered, not because you're heartless, but because your heart is disciplined. And suddenly, the same world that once tried to mold you now bends around your presence. Because you're no longer reacting, you're responding from a place of deep awareness. You walk differently now. No need to impress. No need to explain. No need to prove. Your boundaries are silent. Your energy is selective. Your presence is power. You understand now. The real king is the one who has nothing to prove, because he has nothing to hide. He doesn't flex. He doesn't beg. He doesn't cling. He chooses. And now, my brother, you're that king. You don't need a crown. You don't need a throne. You don't need a kingdom that worships you, because your inner world is sovereign. Your peace is your power. Your silence is your statement. Your solitude is your sanctuary. You stopped being available. And in doing so, you became dangerous to the systems that fed off your submission. You became inspiring to those silently suffering. You became a mirror, reflecting the strength others forgot they had. And above all, you remembered who you truly are. Not the pleaser, not the puppet, not the pawn, but the player, the man who writes his own story and doesn't flinch when the world turns the page.